wasn't too long ago that I actually did a video on this lady, Bessie Coleman. She wanted to be a pilot. It was the 20s. African Americans, and women for that matter, were not allowed to be pilots at that time. So Bessie went to France, learned how to fly, and became incredibly famous. I start with that story first, because you need to understand how difficult it was for black men during this period of time to become pilots. Racially motivated rejection sent a lot of incredible pilots over to France. Seriously. It took about 2 decades for somebody to come to their senses and think, maybe we should utilize people who are really motivated and want to be good at what they do. On April 3rd, 1939, a bill was passed that would allocate funds for African American men to become pilots. This is the beginning of the Tuskegee Airmen. The requirements to become a pilot were crazy. Because of those restrictive elements, there were so many people who thought African American people didn't stand a chance. They just made superheroes. In Montgomery, Alabama, the government had set up a psychological testing unit for pilots. Tuskegee University was also participating in this, and many people who were applying had already been trained as civilian pilots. Tuskegee University is a historically black college. By God, the candidates were incredible. They had to pass IQ tests, and a systemically racist government was trying to make it harder and harder for them to become pilots, and yet that just made them more motivated, so they became the best pilots. The program starts getting a lot of attention. When I was researching this, I found this great quote from one of the pilots who said, this is paraphrased, "We were super better because they were trying to us over all the time." Motivation, baby. So where are we right now in U.S. history? We are not yet in World War II. Much like World War I, we strolled in a little late. I mean, we rocked it, but we were late. The program gets a real kick in early 1941. Pearl Harbor has not yet happened. But Eleanor Roosevelt, one of the best first ladies this country has ever seen, probably the best, I think I would die on that hill, visits the program and takes a ride with one of the pilots, and I just love that. Eleanor hops a ride with this guy. That is C. Alfred Anderson. He was the chief flight instructor, and everybody called him Chief. Judging by the smiles, I think they had a great time. Eleanor worked hard to get this program money so that these pilots could be trained. But things were about to drastically change for the U.S. This was March 29th, 1941, and this was December 7th, 1941. The attack on Pearl Harbor. The program was already underway before Pearl Harbor happened. In January 1941, the War Department formed the all-black 99th Pursuit Squadron. The pilots were trained using single-engine planes at the then segregated Tuskegee Army Airfield. President Roosevelt eventually steps in, and the Tuskegee base is opened in July. And now, trained and graduated, these men are getting ready to get into some of the biggest fights of their life. After the classes have graduated, an African-American man, Lieutenant Colonel Benjamin Oliver Davis Jr., becomes the squadron's leader. And now the group is ready to go into aerial combat on behalf of the United States, fighting for a country that they had to fight so hard to be accepted. That is just the spirit we should all have. That's all. The 99th were ready for combat. On April 1943, soldiers were shipped from Tuskegee to North Africa. North African theater isn't something I know as much about as I should. I think Morocco, Casablanca the movie, and the Vichy government that had a stronghold down there. They started them off a little small first and assigned them to something called Operation Corkscrew, which was to take out a really small island. There was an Italian garrison on an island called French Degree, not gonna help. Pantelleria? 6 pilots of the 99th exchanged fire with German airplanes. And if you know anything about World War II, the Luftwaffe were hardcore. The Lucky Six, as they were called, suffered no losses, and the island of Pantelleria surrendered. In addition to playing a large part of Italy surrendering in 43, this guy became an automatic celebrity. And when I saw his smile, I knew he had main character energy. Charles Blakesley Hall. He was the first of all the famous Tuskegee airmen to shoot down an enemy airplane. Got him hyped up. This was kind of around Tunisia at that point, and more backup is coming. There are more squadrons coming to join the 99th who were, they had that initial, we were here first, we are the baddies. But then they were joined by like the 100th, the 301st, the 302nd, and all of them were just equally as amazing. The group transitioned to calling themselves Mustangs, decorating with red spinners and tails, giving us the famous name, the Red Tails. This part is going to make you livid. Members of the 477th Bombardment Group were still back home waiting. 36 black officers attempted to enter an officers' club because they were officers, and base personnel made them leave. These men who were standing up for our country were still being treated like garbage, so they held a mutiny. Although I think that's a little bit of a dramatic term. It was more like a series of rightfully so angered people showing their disdain. Those actions resulted in the arrest of 162 black officers. Some of them got arrested twice. Respect to those guys. 3 of those men were court-martialed. They kept the charges minor, but still. Only one was convicted, but later, in 1995, those charges were dismissed and they were vindicated. Still, that's the sickening part of the history that you need to remember. The Tuskegee Airmen continued to do missions throughout the rest of the war up until VE Day. They participated in the invasion of France in August of 1944 by escorting bombers and helping with attack missions on the ground in Romania and Czechoslovakia, freeing them from the hold of the Germans. There were so many heroes, and what makes me respect them more is that they had to fight the entire time to help their fellow Americans, and that breaks my heart. We know more about them more, of course, now, and they're taught more often in history, but in 1948, President Harry Truman signed this order, Executive Order 9981. It is hereby declared to be the policy of the President that there shall be equality of treatment and opportunity for all persons in the armed services without regard to race. We have a long way to go. They help light the fire.